In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, other eldritch abominations, I welcome you to my humble little show. And tonight, well, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be reading from the commemorative edition of the Necronomicon, the best weird tales of H.P. Lovecraft. It's a loud book, here you go. Ah! Oh, wow, uh-oh. That may have been a problem I caused a horrendous amount of static from that microphone. Either that or, let me see. Yep, it is just the headphones. One moment. That's better. This is why you don't drop books on people. Because they're, they cause problems. It's not very good. Makes your headphones a bit fidgety. You're going to have to figure out which one is, actually, just so I can make sure that it's turned down. That's the one. There you go. Wait a minute. No, that was mine. Oops. Okay. Right, okay. So, what part of the Necronomicon am I actually going to be doing today? Well, we are going to be actually doing the final part of Herbert West Reanimator. Hooray! So good. If you aren't in the know, it's a story about a man who's been reanimating people with unexpected and slightly bad results. And it's gone to the point where Herbert West, being the crazy, crazy man that he is starting to murder people to get said results. Not going so well for anyone here. But today, we are finally finishing the tale. We've got 2 chapters left. Hopefully it shouldn't take too long. If it does, then what do you know? It's the hour-long episode of Herbert West, Reanimator by H.P. Lovecraft. So good! And after that, we'll have a little bit of a story from the internet, and that's always a thing that happens. And whether or not those are good things or bad things is up to whether or not the story is good. Usually it is. Sometimes it ain't. Usually it is, though. Because I'm really good at choosing stories. Anyway, enough of that jazz. Let's get down to business and actually start reading some Lovecraft. This is Chapter 5 of Herbert West Reanimator. The Horror from the Shadows. Many men have related hideous things, not mentioned in print, which happened on the battlefields of the Great War. Some of these things have made me faint, others have convulsed me with devastating nausea, while still others have made me tremble and look behind me in the dark. Yet, despite the worst of them, I believe I can relate the most hideous thing of all, the shocking, the unnatural, the unbelievable horror from the shadows. In 1915, I was a physician with the rank of first lieutenant in a Canadian regiment in Flanders, one of many Americans to precede the government itself into the gigantic struggle. I had not entered the army on my initiative, but rather as a natural result of the enlistment of the man whose indispensable assistant I was. The celebrated Boston surgical specialist, Dr. Herbert West. Dr. West had been avid for a chance to serve as a surgeon in the Great War, and when the chance had come, he carried me with him, almost against my will. There were reasons why I would have been glad to let the war separate us, reasons why I found the practice of medicine and the companionship of West more and more irritating. But when he had gone to Ottawa and through a college influence secured a medical commission as major, I could not resist the imperious persuasion as one determined that I should accompany him in my usual capacity. When I say Dr. West was avid to serve in battle, I do not mean to imply that he was either naturally warlike or anxious with the safety of civilization. Always an ice-cold, intellectual machine. Slight, blonde, blue-eyed, and spectacled. I think he secretly sneered at my occasional martial enthusiasms and censures of supine neutrality. There was, however, something he wanted in embattled Flanders. In order to secure it, he had to assume a military exterior. What he wanted was not a thing which many persons want, but something connected with the peculiar branch of medical science which he had chosen, quite clandestinely, to follow, and in which he had achieved amazing and occasionally hideous results. It was in fact nothing more or less than an abundant supply of freshly killed men, in every stage of dismemberment. Herbert West needed fresh bodies because his life work was the reanimation of the dead. This work was not known to the fashionable clientele who had so swiftly built up his frame after his arrival in Boston, but was only too well known to me, who had been his closest friend and sole assistant since the old days in the Miskatonic University Medical School at Arkham. It was in those college days that he had begun his terrible experiments. First on small animals, and then on human bodies, shockingly obtained. You had much trouble in discovering the popular formula, for each type of organism was found to need a stimulus especially adapted to it. Terror stalked him when he reflected on his partial failures, nameless things resulting from imperfect solutions or from bodies insufficiently flesh. A certain number of those failures had remained alive. One was in an asylum, while others had vanished, and as he thought of conceivable yet virtually impossible eventualities, he often shivered beneath his usual stolidity. West had soon learned that absolute freshness was the prime requisite for useful specimens, and had accordingly resorted to frightful and unnatural expedients in body snatching. In college and during our early practice together in the factory town of Bolton, my attitude toward him had been largely one of fascinated admiration, but as his boldness in his methods grew, I began to develop a gnawing fear. I didn't like the way he looked at healthy, living bodies, and there came a nightmarish session in the sterile laboratory where I learned that a certain specimen had been a living body when he secured it. That was the first time he had ever been able to revive the quality of rational thought in a corpse, and a success obtained at such a loathsome cost had completely hardened him. Of his methods in the intervening 5 years I dare not speak. I was held to him by sheer force of fear, and witnessed sights that no human tongue could repeat. Gradually I came to find Herbert West himself more horrible than anything he did. That was when it dawned on me that this once normal scientific zeal for prolonging life had subtly degenerated into a mere morbid and ghoulish curiosity and secret sense of charnel picturesqueness. His interest had become a hellish and perverse addiction to the repellently and fiendishly abnormal. He gloated calmly over artificial monstrosities, which would make the most healthy men drop dead from fright and disgust. He became, behind his pallid intellectuality, a fastidious Baudelaire of physical experiment, a languid Elagabalus of the tombs. Dangers he met unflinchingly, crimes he committed unmoved. I think the climax came when he proved his point that rational life could be restored, and sought new worlds to conquer, by experimenting on the reanimation of detached parts of bodies. He had wild and original ideas on the independent vital properties of organic cells and nerve tissue separated from natural physiological systems, and achieved some hideous preliminary results in the form of never-dying, artificially nourished tissue obtained from the nearly hatched eggs of an indescribable tropical reptile. 2 biological points he was exceedingly anxious to settle. First, whether any amount of consciousness and rational action might be possible without the brain, proceeding from the spinal cord and various nerve centers, and second, whether any kind of ethereal, intangible relation distinct from the material cells may exist to link the surgically separated parts of what has previously been a single living organism. All this research work required a prodigious supply of healthy slaughtered human flesh, and that was why Herbert West had entered the Great War. The phantasmal, unmentionable thing occurred one midnight, late in March 1915, in a field hospital behind the lines of St. Eloi. I wondered even now if it could even be other than a demonic dream of delirium. West had a private laboratory in an east room of the barn-like temporary edifice, assigned him on his plea that he was devising new and radical methods for the treatment of hitherto hopeless cases of maiming. There he worked like a butcher in the midst of gory wares. I could never get used to the levity with which he handled and classified certain things. At times, he actually did perform marvels of surgery for the soldiers, but his chief delights were of less public and philanthropic kind, requiring many explanations of sounds which seemed peculiar even amidst the babble of their damned. Among these sounds were frequent revolver shots. Surely not uncommon on a battlefield, but distinctly uncommon in a hospital. Dr. West's reanimated specimens were not meant for long existence or large audience. Besides human tissue, West employed much of the reptile embryo tissue which he had cultivated with such singular results. It was better than a human material for maintaining life in organless fragments, and that was now my friend's chief activity. In the dark corner of the laboratory, over a queer incubating burner, he kept a large, covered vat full of this reptilian cell matter, which multiplied and grew puffily and hideously. On the night of which I speak, we had a splendid new specimen. A man at once physically powerful and of such high mentality that a sensitive nervous system was assured. It was rather ironic, for he was the officer who had helped West to his commission, and who was now to have been our associate. Moreover, he had in the past securely studied the theory of reanimation to some extent under Dr. West. Major Sir Eric Morland Chapham Lee, DSO, was the greatest surgeon in our division, and had been hastily assigned to St. Eloi sector when the news of the heavy fighting reached headquarters. He had come in an aeroplane piloted by the intrepid Lieutenant Ronald Hill, only to be shot down when directly over his destination. The fall had been spectacular and awful. Hill was unrecognizable afterwards, but the wreck yielded up the great surgeon in a nearly decapitated but otherwise intact condition. West had greedily seized the lifeless thing, which had once been his friend and fellow scholar, and I shuddered when he finished severing his head, placing his hellish vat of pulpy reptile tissue to preserve it for future experiments, and proceeded to treat the decapitated body on the operating table. He injected the new blood, joined certain veins, arteries, and nerves at the headless neck, and closed the ghastly aperture with engrafted skin for an unidentified specimen who had borne an officer's uniform. I knew what he wanted: to see if this highly organized body could exhibit without its head any of the signs of mental life which had distinguished Sir Eric Morland Chapham Lee. Once a student of reanimation, this silent trunk was now gruesomely called upon to exemplify it. I can still see Herbert West under the sinister electric light as he injected his reanimating solution into the arm of the headless body. The scene I cannot describe. I should faint if I tried it, for there is madness in a room full of classified charnel things, with blood and lesser human debris amongst, almost ankle-deep on the slimy floor, and with hideous reptilian abnormalities sprouting, bubbling, and baking over a winking bluish-green spectre of dim flame in a far corner of black shadows. The specimen, as West repeatedly observed, had a splendid nervous system. Much was expected of it, and as a few twitching motions began to appear, I could see the feverish interest on West's face. He was ready, I think, to see proof of his increasingly strong opinion that consciousness, reason, and personality can exist independently of the brain, that man has no central connected spirit, but is merely a machine of nervous matter, each section more or less complete in itself. In one triumphant demonstration, West was about to relegate the mystery of life to the category of myth. The body now twitched more vigorously, and beneath our avid eyes commenced to heave in a frightful way. The arms stirred disquietingly, and the legs drew up, and various muscles contracted in a repulsive kind of writhing. Then the headless thing threw out its arms in a gesture which was unmistakably one of desperation, an intelligent desperation, apparently sufficient to prove every theory of Herbert West. Certainly, the nerves were recalling the man's last act in life, the struggle to get free of the falling aeroplane. What followed I shall never positively know. It may have been wholly a hallucination from the shock caused at the instant by the sudden and complete destruction of the building in a cataclysm of German shell fire. Who can gainsay it, since West and I were the only proved survivors? West liked to think that before his recent disappearance, but there were times when he could not. For it was queer that we both had the same hallucination. The hideous occurrence itself was very simple, notable only for what it implied. The body on the table had risen with a blind and terrible groping, and we had heard a sound. I should not call that sound a voice, for it was too awful. And yet its timbre was not the most awful thing about it, neither was its message. It merely screamed, "Jump, Ronald! For God's sake, jump!" The awful thing was its source, for it had come from the large covered vat in that ghoulish corner of crawling black shadows. Chapter 6. The Tomb Legions. When Dr. Herbert West disappeared a year ago, the Boston police questioned me closely. They suspected that I was holding something back, and perhaps suspected even graver things, but I could not tell them the truth because they would have not believed it. They knew indeed that West had been connected with activities beyond the credence of ordinary men, for his hideous experiments in the reanimation of dead bodies had long been too extensive to admit of perfect secrecy. But the final, soul-shattering catastrophe held elements of demonic fantasy which would make even me doubt the reality of what I saw. I was West's closest friend and only confidential assistant. We had met years before in a medical school, and from the first I had shared his terrible researches. He'd solely tried to perfect a solution which, injected into the veins of newly deceased, would restore life. A labor demanding an abundance of fresh corpses and therefore involving the most unnatural actions. Still more shocking were the products of some of the experiments. Grisly masses of flesh that had been dead, but that West wakened to a blind, brainless, nauseous animation. These were the usual results, for in order to reawaken the mind, it was necessary to have the specimen so absolutely fresh that no decay would possibly affect the delicate brain cells. This need for very fresh corpses had been West's moral undoing. They were hard to get, and one awful day he had secured his specimen while it was still alive and vigorous. A struggle, a needle, and a powerful alkaloid had transformed it into a very fresh corpse, and the experiment had succeeded for a brief and memorable moment, but West emerged with a soul calloused and seared and a hardened eye, which sometimes glanced with a kind of hideous and calculating appraisal at men of especially sensitive brain and especially vigorous physique. Toward the last I actually became afraid of West, acutely, for he began to look at me that way. People did not seem to notice his glances, but they noticed my fear, and after his disappearance used that as a basis for some absurd suspicions. West in reality was more afraid than I, for his abominable pursuits entailed a life of furtiveness and dread of every shadow. Partly it was the police he feared, but sometimes his nervousness was deeper and more nebulous, touching on certain indescribable things into which he had injected a morbid life, and from which he had not seen that life depart. He usually finished his experiments with a revolver, but a few times he had not been quick enough. There was the first specimen on whose rifle grave marks of clawing were later seen. There was also that Arkham professor's body which had done cannibal things before it had been captured and thrust unidentified into a madhouse cell in Sefton, where it beat at the walls for 16 years. Most of the other possibly surviving results were things less easy to speak of, for in later years West's scientific zeal had degenerated into an unhealthy and fantastic mania. He had spent his chief skill in vitalizing not entire human bodies, but isolated parts, or parts joined to organic matter other than human. It had become fiendishly disgusting by the time he disappeared. Many of the experiments could not be even hinted at in print. The Great War, through which both of us served as sergeant, had intensified this side of West. In saying that West's fear of his specimens was nebulous, I have in mind, in particular, its complex nature. Part of it came from knowing of the existence of such nameless monsters, while another part arose from apprehension of bodily harm they might, under certain circumstances, do him. Their disappearance added horror to the situation. Of them all, West knew the whereabouts of only one, the pitiful asylum thing. Then there was a more subtle fear, a very fantastic sensation resulting from a curious experiment in the Canadian Army in 1915. West, in the midst of a severe battle, had reanimated Major Sir Eric Morgan Chatham Lee, DSO, a fellow physician who knew about his experiments and could have duplicated them. The head had been removed so that the possibilities of quasi-intelligent life in the trunk might be investigated. Just as the building was wiped out by a German shell, there had been a success. The trunk had moved intelligently and unbelievable to relate. We were both sickeningly sure that the acute articulate sounds had come from the detached head, as it lay in a shadowy corner of the laboratory. West's last quarters were in a vulnerable house of much elegance, overlooking one of the oldest burying grounds in Boston. He had chosen the place for purely symbolic and fantastically aesthetic reasons, since most of the interments were of colonial period and therefore of little use to a scientist seeking very fresh bodies. The laboratory was in a subcellar secretly constructed by imported workmen and contained a huge incinerator for the quiet and complete disposal of such bodies, or fragments and synthetic mockeries of bodies, as might remain from the morbid experiments and unhallowed amusements of the owner. During the excavation of this cellar, the workmen had struck some exceedingly ancient masonry. undoubtedly connected with the old burying ground, yet far too deep to correspond with any known sepulchre within. After a number of calculations, West decided that it represented some secret chamber beneath the tomb of the Everalls, where the last interment had been made in 1768. I was with him when he studied the nitrous-dripping walls, laid bare by the spades and mattocks of the men, and was prepared for the gruesome thrill which would attend the uncovering of centuried grave secrets. But for the first time, West's new timidity conquered his natural curiosity, and he betrayed his degenerating fibre by ordering the masonry left intact and plastered over. Thus it remained till that final hellish night, part of the walls of that secret laboratory. I speak of West's decadence, but I must add it was a purely mental and intangible thing. Outwardly he was sane to the last, calm, cold, slight, and yellow-haired, with spectacled blue eyes and a general aspect of youth, which years of fears seemed never to change. He seemed calm even when he thought of that clawed grave and looked over his shoulder, even when he thought of that carnivorous thing that gnawed and pawed at Sefton bars. The end of Herbert West was one evening in our joint study, when he was dividing his curious glance between the newspaper and me. A strange headline item instructed him with the crumpled pages, and a nameless Titan claw had seemed to reach down through the 16 years. Something fearsome and incredible had happened at Sefton Asylum, 50 miles away, stunning the neighborhood and baffling the police. In the small hours of the morning, a body of silent men had entered the grounds, and their leader had aroused the attendants. He was a menacing military figure who talked without moving his lips, and whose voice seemed almost ventriloquially connected with an immense black case he had carried. His expressionless face was handsome to the point of radiant beauty, but had shocked the superintendent when some hall light fell on it. For it was a wax face, with eyes of painted glass. Some nameless accident had befallen this man. A larger man guided his steps, a repellent hulk whose bluish face seemed to half eaten away by some unknown malady. The speaker had asked for the custody of the cannibal monster committed from Arkham 16 years before, and upon being refused, gave a signal which precipitated a shocking riot. The fiends had been beaten, trampled, and bitten every attendant who did not flee, killing 4 and finally succeeding in the liberation of the monster. These victims, who could not recall the event without hysteria, swore that the creatures had acted less like men than like unthinkable automata, guided by the wax-faced leader. By the time help could be summoned, every trace of the men and of their mad charge had vanished. From the hour of reading this item until midnight, West sat almost paralyzed. At midnight the doorbell rang, startling him fearfully. All the servants were asleep in the attic, so I answered the bell. As I have told police, there was no wagon in the street, but only a group of strange-looking figures, bearing a large square box, which they deposited in the hallway after one of them had grunted in highly unnatural voice, "Express. Prepaid." They filed out of the house with a jerky tread, and as I watched them go, I had an odd idea that they were turning toward the ancient cemetery, on which the back of the house abutted. When I slammed the door after them and West came downstairs and looked at the box, it was about 2 feet square and bore West's correct name and present address. But it also bore the inscription, "From Alec Morland Chapham Lee, St. Eloi, Flanders." 6 years before, in Flanders, a shelled hospital had fallen upon the headless, reanimated trunk of Dr. Chapham Lee, and upon the detached head, which, perhaps, had uttered articulate sounds. West was not excited now. His condition was more ghastly. Quickly he said, "It's the finish. But let's incinerate this." We carried the thing down to the laboratory, listening. I don't remember many particulars. You can imagine my state of mind, but it is a vicious lie to say it was Herbert West's body I put in the incinerator. We both inserted the whole unopened box, closed the door, and started the electricity. Nor did any sound come from the box after all. It was West who first noticed the falling plaster on that part of the wall, where the ancient tomb masonry had been covered up. I was going to run, but he had stopped me. Then I saw a small black aperture, felt a ghoulish wind of ice, and smelled the charnel bowels of putrescent earth. There was no sound, but just then the electric lights went out, and I saw, outlined against some phosphorescence of the netherworld, a horde of silent, toiling things, which only insanity, or worse, could create. Their outlines were human, semi-human, fractionally human, and not human at all. The horde was grotesquely heterogeneous. They were removing the stones quietly, one by one, from the centured wall, and then, as the breach became large enough, they came out into the laboratory in a single file, led by a stalking thing with a beautiful head made of wax. A sort of mad-eyed monstrosity behind the leader seized on Herbert West. West didn't resist, or utter a sound. Then they all sprang at him and tore him to pieces before my eyes, bearing the fragments away into that subterranean vault of fabulous abominations. West's head was carried off by the wax-headed leader, who wore a Canadian officer's uniform. As it disappeared, I saw that the blue eyes behind the spectacles were hideously blazing with their first touch of frantic, visible emotion. Servants found me unconscious in the morning. West was gone. The incinerator only contained unidentifiable ashes. Detectives have questioned me, but what can I say? The Sefton tragedy, they will not connect with West. Not that, nor the men with the box whose existence they deny. I told them of the vault, and they pointed me to the unbroken plaster wall and laughed. So I told them no more. They imply that I am either a madman or a murderer. Probably I am mad. But I might not be mad. If those accursed tomb legions had not been so silent. Woo! That actually picked up by the end. I was surprised. That was a pleasant surprise to see it actually, change. And go like, whoa, it's different. Oh my god, it's a change from the norm. It's not just description after description. A lot of things happened. And that's good. That's what we like. We enjoy things happening in Lovecraft, because when he actually does do stuff, it's very well done. But of course, sometimes... No, sometimes he doesn't do that. Sometimes he's a mad lad. Sometimes he just likes describing things for a very long time and occasionally being a bit racist. But that's fine. We can deal with racists occasionally. I mean, come on, we have one in the White House. I'm very funny. I'm not. That was an easy joke, mostly because it's true. Funny joke again. Humor, am I right? Making fun of current events, am I right? I want to die. I don't. Never mind. Okay, so what have we got to do now? Because we do have a little bit of time left. In fact, we have 30 minutes, and I'm surprised. I thought we would have less time, you know? I thought we would have, like 15. But no, we have a good amount. Ooh, that was gross. I know a good one. A good story that's not too long, but at the same time, pretty nice. It's a little story about a creature that a little kid imagines in his head, and he's like, "Hello, little man, how are you doing?" And then he's like, "Hey, little kid, I'm gonna stab you." And the kid's like, "Oh, you're imaginary though, so shut up." Hey, but it's not so simple, meh. It's a story called Mr. Widemouth, and it's credited to Perfect Circle 35. Can't create a perfect circle without Photoshop, you nerd. How Perfect Circle 35. What a name. What a silly, silly name. A name for nerds. Oh my god, one of my friends just apparently got a piercing. Oh my god. Okay. Wow. That's amazing. Whoa. And I just... okay, I need to get the weirdness out. I just need to be less weird on air. I have a thing to do, not sponsored by a Red Bull. Delicious caffeine. That's totally not turning me insane. I need to read some things. Specifically, a story called Mr. Widemouth. It's actually quite a popular one, actually. You'll hear a lot of people reading it on the internet, you know. It's very well known and such. Nerds. Alright, here we go. This is Mr. Widemouth. I hope you, ladies and gentlemen, and other eldritch abominations enjoy. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to a college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there were fragments in the attic of my brain which belonged to the various homes we had lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless, chasing after another boy in the backyard in a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float in a creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were just made yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories were simply lucid dreams, produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring, but in my heart, I know they're real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine. Population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. Day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was a horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. "You look kind of like a Furby," I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. Furby? What's a Furby? He asked. I shrugged. You know, the toy, the little robot with big ears. You can pet him and feed him, almost like a real pet. Oh. Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. He didn't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend. I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped to chicken me. I lay under your bed, he later explained. I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore. We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The third or fourth morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. I have a new game we can play, he said. We have to wait until your mother comes to check on you because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game. After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand. We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway, he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the grand below. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill. And from this angle the drop was farther than 2 stories, due to the incline. I like to play pretend up here, Mr. Widemouth explained. I pretend that there's a big soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try. I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. It's a long drop, I said. But that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If that were the way, you may as well just bounce on a real trampoline. I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. Maybe some other time, I said. I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt. Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. If you say so, he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box. I want to teach you how to juggle, he said. Here are some things you can use to practice, so before I start giving you lessons. I looked in the box. It was full of knives. My parents will kill me, I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. I spanked and grounded for a year. Mr. Widemouth frowned. It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it. I pushed the box away. I can't. I get into trouble. Knives aren't just safe to throw in the air. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and stood under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth woke me up at night, saying he put up a real trampoline under the window, a big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. Mother came to me one morning and told me I had permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would do some good to me, especially after being confined to my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me. "I have something I want you to see," he said. I must have given him a weird look, because he said, "It's safe, I promise." I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail, which ran through the woods behind the house. "This is an important path," he explained. "I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you here." I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond that trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive of Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth I'd be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he said otherwise. For this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. "Early enough for you?" he said. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. "This is the last move, son, I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make some friends." I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was just about to turn into the main road. He gave a little, pitiful wave goodbye, knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood on was empty except for the foundation, and as the house burned down a few years after my family had left, out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belong to children. You can imagine why that's a popular one. You know, tiny Furby creatures stabbing people. Whew, that is a premise. People like that. People appreciate the idea of being stabbed. Apparently, I've got a... Is this 21 minutes? Okay, I got a message from a buddy of mine, voice message, in fact, and this is it. What does that mean? I think that's a Dutch word. Whatever it means, it's bad. Whatever it means, it's probably racist. Why would you do this to me? Never mind. Oh, well. There are worse things that can happen. I mean, there aren't. Getting a text message, getting a message like that during a show, and you have no idea what that means in a certain language you don't understand. Whew! That's not good. Yeah, I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure it's fine. Anyway, while we're on the topic of doing short little creepy stories, I've got another one for you, which is a little one called... let me see if I can find it. It's one about time. One about the time that we have and the time that we have to spend. I think I have it. I think I have it. Aha. Wait a minute. No, I don't. Dang it. Give me a moment. I have an idea. I know how to find it. I've read it before on my YouTube channel, which I'm very proud of. Speaking of which, I'll probably be uploading this to YouTube, so if you want to watch that, you know where to look. And a handsome man with the YouTube channel? Psh, never happens. Should do it anyway. Cause you're a nerd. Funny joke. Okay, where's it gone? It is a good one. It is genuinely... That's the one. I know the one. I know the one. Ah, here it is. It's very short, so, you know, don't be surprised if it's like, oh, I want another story. Because you probably will get one, but another short one again. Because, you know, short is nice. Short allows things to be very quick and allows the writer to pack in a lot of stuff very quickly to make the reader feel something super quickly. And usually a lot of stories that are super quick are super impactful because of that. They're really good. I can name a lot of them off the top of my head, but I won't because I don't remember all of the like short stories that I've read in my life that are really, really short. But, I mean, you know, stuff like Baby Shoes Never Worn or something like that. I can't remember the exact things, but the fact it's like a sentence long. It's like it provokes things real quick, and that's awesome. It's what things should do. Either way, this is another short one. I've got two ones for you. This one, which was written by somebody. There isn't actually a writer to this one. Ooh, interesting. That's real interesting. Wow. But either way, it's a neat one. Either way, this is 7. Emphasis on 7 minutes. If you've ever been in a near-death experience, you may have seen your life flash before your eyes. I've asked several people about this. They said that it was like they went through their life in a whole second. That's not too far-fetched. Your brain likes to avoid stress so that it does not have to deal with facing death. So, if your brain was to think you were going to die, it would go to the easiest way to escape, memory. So when it comes close to the end, your brain turns on every memory you've ever had. The brain will also stay alive for about 7 minutes after you die, provided your brain's intact. So if you have 7 minutes, and you can experience your whole life in 1 second, that's 60 lives per minute. 420 lives in 7 minutes. It's a lot of time. And a lot of experiences with death. How much time do you have left? You see? You see what it does? It makes you think real fast. It makes you go, oh, wait a minute. Oh, that hurts my head. Ooh. In a similar vein, I actually once wrote a story of my own, which is basically a homage to this, because I like this sort of thought-provoking stuff so much. So I wrote something similar. It's not based on the same concept, but it's with the same sort of writing style, this sort of factual style that slowly turns into, like, yeah, this is the scary part. There's a little thing I wrote called The Casting of Shadows. Hopefully you enjoy. If you don't, yell at me because I'm a shite writer. I'm not, I think. I think I'm a good writer. Don't attack me. Thanks. Sometimes our brain likes to play tricks. It has the ability to wake us, but hold us in place as our dreams break into reality. Sleep paralysis. It also has the ability to create things in our day-to-day lives. Figures, creatures, even noises can spawn from the back of our minds. Sleep deprivation, drugs, are all factors. But little do people know about the other times our brains decide to hallucinate. The Ganzfeld effect is a fabulous example. Principle simple. If you distance yourself from everything, from sound, from sight, from stimulus, you start to see. Start to see shapes, you start to hear noises, just as much as you would if you were doped up on some hallucinogenic chemical. Creatures coming from full-blooded boredom. On the surface, it sounds just like a pleasant bit of trivia, and the common man, when hearing this, usually shrugs and walks on with his day-to-day existence, but you're still listening, aren't you? So I figure you want to know the eternal question, which is, why? Even scientists are baffled. They say that the brain requires stimulus, and as a result, it creates shapes to quell the boredom, but it doesn't explain dreams. As to why we try and rest, our brain creates scenarios and creatures. It certainly doesn't explain the horrific ones. Dreams of illness, of pain, of fear, nightmares. I have a theory. Our brains, being as intelligently built as they are, have a subconscious knowledge. The shadow from the corner of your eye, when you feel someone's following you, you can't see them, but you know they're there. Your brain just feels it. Surely it makes sense for our brain to prepare us when that feeling becomes real. To test us the shadows with figments. To keep us on our toes. Our brain trains us for that. But this raises another question. Another unpleasant question. If our brain creates monsters and figures to prepare us, then what is out there? What are we going to find when it's not just paranoia or our brain playing a trick? When there is a man following you, when there is a figure, when there is a monster. When the shadow cast ain't alone, but cast from something very, very real. Ooh, maybe your brain hallucinates because there is actually monsters out there. Ever think about that, you nerds? Bet you didn't, because you didn't hear that story before, because my writing's so good and original. Probably have thought of that before, and you probably have read something similar, but hey, what do I know? I'm just a passerby, and who's reading stupid stuff to you. I don't know nothing, because I'm a nerd. Ha ha, funny joke. Anyway, that's, I think, will be the end of the show for today. A little bit early, maybe, not entirely past 10, but I am tired, and I need to make sure that I get some stuff read. And like I need to do voice work, man. I have a job. God. Anyway, it was a lovely time hearing or not seeing or not having any sort of contact with any of you while I read things that you might not be listening to. But until next time, stay, reading things. Read the cool stuff that scares you. Make sure that you are enjoying reading for once, because it's a good thing to do. Keeps your brain active. But besides all of that, the most important thing, stay spooked.